Hi, Shane. Thanks for being here. I know that being in the office on Facebook isn't your favorite thing, but I do, well, yet, maybe it will become one of your favorite things.
It's not that I mind it. I'm just very busy during the day usually, and kind of shy.
Yeah. Well, you are a double Virgo, so I mean, do you think being all public is hard for a Virgo?
Definitely hard for me.
Mm, yeah. Well, just imagine that we're sitting in the office and all the people who are watching are just in the office or at the school. It's like, imagine that we're just at a school. You wouldn't be afraid to be at a school, would you?
No.
Yeah, okay. So let's just chill and have a conversation. So, really, the reason that I humbly asked you to talk to me today is because you were teaching me about something yesterday that was blowing my mind. And I just think that I wanted us all to learn about it together. So, one of the things that's happening is we're taking the Valens anthology out of, being just sitting there to now reading it with the whole group of people. We're reading it in a reading group on Thursdays, and then we're actually taking the feedback that we get from that group out to the Skyscript forum, and we're letting people have some access to what we're finding. And so, um, we're not trying to annoy the astrology community. We're actually just trying to include them if they want to. But this is a scary process for me because I just feel like, oh, okay, here I go into a big critique. But you actually told me I shouldn't even be using that word. You suggested the word feedback. Um,
Right.
and so then you were saying that as at your job as a computer programmer, you do constant feedback of things like this, and it's called a code review.
That's right.
So I was wondering if
So,
you could teach me what is that?
so as a computer programmer, whenever we write our code to do whatever it's supposed to do, whether that's fixing a bug or, implementing a new feature, we post it up to the site and we have somebody else from our team. At my company, it's usually somebody from our own team go and do a review of the code that we've written in order to provide feedback on it. So they're going to go through it and make sure that it meets our standards in terms of formatting, which can be an important thing in a coding project, just like it can be in a book. They're going to make sure it is technically accurate. They're going to make sure it has all of the quality checks that it's supposed to have. And if it's doing something weird that's like not a pattern we use, they might call that out. Or if it's, doing something inefficiently, they might call that out as well. And it's just a way of making sure that whatever code we write is of a high, consistent quality before we merge it in and release the next version of our software. So it's a constant feedback loop. And a code review can go back and forth with multiple questions and answers. You can have multiple people do a code review before it gets approved in order to get merged in. And the whole point of it is just to make it better, make the product as a whole better, because we're all responsible for that. It's all our baby together, you know? And so looking for this type of feedback on every change that we make is just designed to help it be the best product it can be. But it is very much a collaborative process and it's supposed to be friendly. It is a critique in that we are actively seeking constructive criticism, but really we're just looking for feedback. And sometimes the feedback might just be, LGTM looks good to me, which is, this is a pretty basic piece of code. There's nothing really difficult about it. I have nothing to say other than good job, go for it. Or, if it's a more junior or inexperienced engineer who's being reviewed by a more experienced or seasoned engineer, it might be a very in-depth code review that advises using, different libraries or different patterns or different ways of doing things that helps them grow as a programmer. So it's like a constant feedback loop that helps us grow as individuals and ensure the quality of our product. But it is meant to be polite, you know? If somebody comes into a code review and is like, this is terrible, I hate this, you can't do it this way, blah, 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 probably not going to ask them for their feedback again in the future because they're not really being helpful, you know? Like, I don't need somebody coming in and spitting in my face when all I'm asking them to do is, you know, does this look good to you?
So do you ever get emotionally affected by a code review?
I do. Still, sometimes I do. Learning to take this feedback was definitely a challenge because, as you mentioned, I'm a double Virgo, so I have a tendency to be very perfectionist and very hard on myself. So if I got feedback where someone thought I needed to change things, my world just came tumbling down on me. I'm so hard on myself. I failed. I'm never going to be good at this job. It devastated me at the start of my career. But ultimately, I realized that it was them trying to help me and help me grow. And so nowadays, I take it pretty well. You know, I'm not going to say that, you know, it never affects me because sometimes it does. You know, if I do something that I'm really proud of and somebody doesn't like it, I'm like, oh, but I thought that was so cool. You know, and there are times too when, you know, someone might suggest I do something a different way or suggest that I take a different path, and I'll just be like, nah, not gonna take that piece of feedback. I understand why you're suggesting it, and I disagree, so I'm gonna do it my way. Um,
So that's interesting to me because in the Valens translation, it's like part of why I get nervous about the feedback is because sometimes I don't agree with it. And there's this idea that I should just flex to every piece of feedback. But I also read the Greek myself and I trust my own translation abilities. I'm not saying that I can't take feedback but I like that you're saying that there are times where you get to be like, nah, that one I can't, I'm not taking. Like, so that is part of the code review is like just that so what if a coder too often said, no, I'm not taking feedback? Like, is that a problem or how does that work?
Certainly, and you know, with programming, it's going to be a little bit different than like a translation. But if somebody was constantly refusing to take feedback and change their work, that would be a performance issue. You know, we'd talk to them about, hey, maybe you're not cut out for this career. You know, if you want to be a programmer that never gets feedback from anybody, go be like an indie app developer where the only person who you're ever going to code with is yourself. That's not, I mean, there are people out there who do that and they make a fantastic living, but it's, I think, not as rewarding. You know, part of the joy is being able to collaborate with other people. But yeah, if they were constantly refusing to take the feedback, that's not necessarily a good sign. You know, that means they're probably not actually interested in having feedback at all because they just don't care.
So
You know,
the times where you reject feedback, it's because you know better in some way, or you're the biggest leader in the bunch in that specific instance.
in most cases, yes. You know, I've been doing this now for 16, 17 years. And on my team, I am the technical lead. I'm the team lead. And the only person who's been on this team longer than me has been on the team for 1 week longer than I have. So I am the expert. Um, I know the system better than anybody else. And that gives me a lot of sway when it comes to pointing things out like, what you're doing here is not really going to work because when you get to this and this and this and this and this and this and this, it falls apart.
Hmm.
Or, you know, no, sometimes my feedback is going to be like, hey, I know that in the future we're going to be doing this. So if you code what you're doing now this way, that's going to make it more reusable in the future for us. It's definitely a bit different than in a translation team. You know, like if you had multiple people reading the Greek and debating over it, you might have like the senior Greek linguist who would have a bit more sway in how the translation came out. Does that make sense?
Totally, and I think that's where the question of like there is a question of who knows better about Valens than who else. Like for example, I think, because I can read the Greek and I've been a sign language interpreter for 25 years, I think I am in some ways the translation team lead as far as like translation processing. So it's like why would we make this translation decision? I think I have a say in that. It's like, well, it's
Yeah.
this, and I can even describe why I would make that case, right? But then there's a lot of historians in astrology who know more than I do about the historical relationship of Valens to the world. And so, like, in that way, I'm not the team lead. I feel like they could be the historical team lead and I would be the linguistic team lead. Do you ever have two team leads?
Yeah, certainly. Particularly in a case like that where you've got experts in different things. Like we could have one person who's an expert on the particular coding language that we're writing in, and one person who's an expert on the particular database that we're working with. The database person might have very strong opinions about how the database part should be done. The language person might have very strong opinions about how the Java code could be written, or Python, or whatever it is. So yeah, that's absolutely possible. And there are definitely cases where, those two team leads might need to get more in sync on something, because, there's a million ways to connect a programming project to a database with different trade-offs for each one. They might have strong opinions each on one particular option, and they need to come to a conclusion on that case as to how the project is going to move forward.
Interesting. This is so healing. Like I actually, my heart chakra is like really spinning right now because I feel like, like okay, let me ask you this. So would any two computer coders write this code the same way?
Almost never.
But they both can do the function. How can they both be correct if they're both different?
I mean, programming is, very logical structure. There's different syntax to achieve the same thing. Like, a common control mechanism is an if-then statement or an if-then-else statement. But there could be multiple ways to go about doing that. You could even use a case statement, which is like a multi-branched if-then, if A do this, if B do this, if C do this, or you could do switch A this, B this, C this. Depending on the language, there can be different trade-offs to using each one. Syntactically, there can be different things, like you can use a for loop, or you can do a stream, or you can do whatever. In the end, logically, the code is probably going to be doing the same things. It might just be the way you write the code to achieve that. In some cases, there are going to be ways to optimize the code so that, like, rather than looping over this collection of things, like say you're wanting to go through your address book and alphabetize it. And then after you do that, you also want to, capitalize the first and last names to make sure everything's consistent. You could loop over it once and alphabetize it, and then loop over it again to alphabetize the names, or you could do it all in one loop. So things like that.
So it's like there's different ways to accomplish the same goal using different languages but two coders can be equally proficient using two different languages and two different approaches, but they can achieve the same end goal.
Or even within the same language. Absolutely. In programming, there's going to be different things called libraries, which are like tools, other software that people have created that helps us write software. And, it's often we use things to help speed up the types of checks that we have to do on a regular basis. Like if we have a collection of objects, do we need to check, is this collection null? Like, have we not even initialized it yet? Or is the collection empty? Sometimes those mean different things, but sometimes we want to handle them the same way. So rather than having to constantly write like, if this is null or if this is empty, then go do this. We might use a library that does something like if null or empty. So it's just a simpler way to do that. And when I was a brand new programmer, I was writing everything by hand. I wasn't using these other libraries because I didn't know about them. And so the senior programmers who were tired of doing things by hand told me about these other libraries because they didn't want to read my code either. Because they're like, this is too complicated. Stop doing all this stuff by hand. Go make it easier on yourself and just use this tool.
Mhm. Interesting. So, I mean, I always think of translation a lot like coding. I mean, I think you and I have similar kinds of autism. Like, I mean, not to like call you an autist, but it's like you and I are so similar, and because
On the
you're a
spectrum.
what?
I'm a little on the spectrum.
Yeah, but it's like the fact you write computer code is like a being a linguist kind of, and like I'm a linguist with Greek, and it's like I just see so many parallels in like how our coding brain works. I mean, you and I play word games all the time, and like we definitely have that word tripping thing. We both have Mercury Uranus connections too. Like it's just, it's like being a word tripper, you know. But yeah, do you see the translation process as similar to the coding process?
Absolutely. Especially after talking to you a bit about how you do your translations. Like the idea of using chunking or um, I can't remember the terms that you've used in the past, but
Expansion, explicitization.
yes, those that can be very similar concepts to how we code something.
Yeah. I love this. I learned so much about the team approach from you because you guys coders work on teams, and you guys have solidified these processes because you're hired to do these processes. I think astrologers, we work in this kind of rogue environment where we're all having to self-fund ourselves. So it's like no one's teaching us how to do this like leadership process. I mean, what's a scrum? Is that what it's called?
Yeah, it's Scrum. Actually, the term I think comes from rugby, but where it's like the huddle up where all the players get together to debrief, basically. In the programming world, Scrum is a daily meeting that we have where we want to cover three things. What did we accomplish yesterday? What are we planning to accomplish today? And do we have any blockers? Anything that would prevent us from moving forward on that? And that's all it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be super simple, super quick. Even with a team of like 8 people on it, it shouldn't take more than about 15 minutes. It often does because we go off on tangents and we all try to help each other as blockers. And if someone has a question about something, it derails. But occasionally, when we have a day where we've got too many meetings and we can't actually have our meeting to do our stand up, we'll just do it in our chat program. And it's literally, 3 lines from every person. It's fast, it's easy. But it lets us know what each person is working on and how it might tie into what we're working on. And if there's a blocker, can we help them resolve it? That's one of the things I do a lot as a team lead. Like if somebody's blocked because they need something, like they need an answer or they need access to a tool, part of my job is to go make sure that that's taken care of.
Fascinating. So when you guys do your collaborative process, you disagree sometimes, right?
Sure, absolutely.
And do you still like your coworkers? Are you guys nice to each other, or what does that look like?
Very much.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've worked together for a long time, so in many ways it's kind of like a big group of siblings. We'll like pull each other's hair and put whoopee cushions on each other's seats, but we're also there for each other when things are, in the mud. So it's a lot of fun, but we definitely do disagree. And sometimes the arguments can get heated, but we all take things carefully. We're always polite, even though they're heated, uh, we don't devolve into name calling or being mean. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. And so when you work on projects, because like the Moira Press has several projects going on. Like we have the Wonder Book project right now, and then we have like the Valens, comparison project, and then we have all these projects. And I know you guys work on several projects, so do you have to draw in different teams for different projects?
Depending on the project, yes. Some of the projects are going to be specifically working with another team. Like for an example, one of the things my piece of software does is it displays learning resources to our customers. So this could be help documentation, or it could be actual training classes that our training team at the company has produced. And the company as a whole wanted to build out a new type of training feature. And so we had to talk to the team who was going to be servicing these training requests by, building out the courses, delivering them to customers. We had to work with them closely on how to get their offerings into my system. And so there was a lot of back and forth as we described, like, these are going to be the methods we use for communicating from system to system. These are going to be the, technologies or terminologies we use for things so that everybody is meaning the same thing when we use the same words, which can be very tricky sometimes. Words can be very overloaded in a lot of companies. So, like, for example, I'm talking about the learning team. Well, their official name is the e-learning team. They have the e-learning website, which contains courses, of which one of the course types is e-learning. So when I say e-learning, do I mean the team? Do I mean the website? Or do I mean the type of learning content? We have to be very clear sometimes with what we're talking about. Otherwise, we get things confused and we're talking but not communicating.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So is there anything that you think the astrologers should know from working on teams or anything you've done or from what you've seen? You went to Norwalk, so anything you think we should know?
I guess it depends on the type of project that you're doing. For something like a translation comparison, you definitely want a team. Depending on how big and how complex you wanted things to be, you might have one person who is the main representative from each of the translations. And then you may have one person who's the coordinator to help track any discrepancies and lead and record any resolutions or discussions. Um, if you were doing a project like starting up a new chapter of NCGR, you might have a team of people working to help get that timing chart right for the inception. I'm totally blanking on the name of that right now.
An election?
Yes, that.
Well, inception is the formal word like that the historic like the Hellenistic astrologers use. So good job.
Cool. So yeah, I would say don't be afraid of working in teams. You're going to be dealing with different opinions, but sometimes you put those together and you come out with a superior resolution, superior product.
Mhm. So this is a kind of, I'm actually seriously interested in what you think of this, and I'm sorry I didn't run this by you before the video, but this is not scripted, we're just talking. So, do you think there should be a definitive translation of Valens, or do you think that we should just improve the Moira Press translation and then let like the Riley translation and the Schmidt translation stand on their own? I mean, we would have to work with the teams of those people to really make a definitive, so we couldn't even do that project. I mean, what do you think?
Why couldn't we? We absolutely could do that. Uh, and the definitive edition is it's one of those terms that may or may not actually mean anything. For instance, you could just on your own re-release the Moira Press translations as is and put definitive edition in the title. And I don't think there's any legal way for somebody to stop that. It's literally just part of your title. It doesn't actually mean anything. There's no international standard out there that says this is what a definitive edition is, that you would have to be, beholden to that type of a standard. a definitive edition where you combined the actual translators from each edition. Obviously, that wouldn't be possible because Schmidt is no longer with us, from what I understand.
Mm,
But
bless his heart.
uh, you could definitely like work with those translators, but it would definitely have to be something where it was an intentional group project. And the answer would be that no one owns that edition. It would be owned by the group, like an actual organization that defines the group, which people may join or leave over time. And
Mhm.
that group would be responsible for it. That would be something where maybe instead of definitive edition, you would call it the community edition.
That's like the NLV Bible, or what is that? The new, they're like they do this with the Bible sometimes. Well, they do like a community version, or like,
Yeah,
yeah, the NLV. It's the New Living Bible, or something like that.
something like that. But yeah, that's kind of what I would go with, would be probably calling it a community edition would be the better, more accurate term for it. Because you could release a definitive edition, Riley could release a definitive edition, and they're both the definitive edition of your translation, you
Interesting.
know?
Yeah, I
So
kind of feel like that term is just inflammatory, like definitive edition. It's like why I think I want to just get rid of that term.
it can be because what you're basically saying is this is the only translation that's worth anything. All other translations are bad.
Yeah, and
So
that's not
definitive
very.
edition is not a really friendly term. And like, unless it was done by the community and instead of community edition, they voted to call it the definitive edition. But again, if that were the case, you should have some sort of a record that that was an intentional thing. And what we mean by definitive is this was the community edition. The community put this together. The community considers this definitive. That's why we called it the definitive edition.
Yeah, in a way, that would be better to have somebody head that up who's not any of the translators of any of the editions. Like they,
Mm-hmm.
but it's like with the coders, computer coders, can you imagine if we were like, all right, well, let's have the definitive code for XYZ. It's like, well, you said that no two coders will ever do it the same. Like, why would you need the definitive code if it's working, if it creates the website at the end that you need? Like, I don't know that we need a definitive edition. I just don't think that's necessary.
And what you're talking about in the coding world is the open source ecosystem. It's open code that anybody can have access to. Anyone can read it. Anyone can, you know, take that code and go do something with it. There's different licenses and legalities behind what exactly you can do with it. But anybody can also contribute back to it if they meet the contribution standards for whatever that particular library is. Like you may have heard of the operating system Linux. It's open source.
Oh yeah.
It's free. There's also something like 400 different flavors of Linux because of different communities that disagreed on what the definitive edition should be. And so they just forked off from that original copy and went and started their own parallel development. And sometimes they contribute bits and pieces back and forth, and sometimes they don't.
Mm. Well, I learned so much from Fern, and like I learned so much from the controversy episode of Night Stars because you remember how the crowd would blow up every time we brought up a new controversy? It was like, should you keep your animals inside? And then they're just like, bam, like yes, no, like so. I think making a definitive translation is too controversial because it's forcing a decision about things that have many different viewpoints on it.
Yeah, yeah.
Like
Yeah, I would say I would probably avoid definitive edition unless you were intentionally doing it as a marketing ploy. And usually I would say stick to it being the definitive edition of your whatever it is.
well, yeah, it's like from an artist perspective, it's like sometimes I don't let people, when I was doing the Valens anthology, I wouldn't really let people involved in my translation very much because it was like I was trying to create my vision and then people can now have their feedback. What do you guys think of this or that? It's almost like it's better to do a community approach to an already existing piece of art. Like you make the art and then you let people feedback, and then you create that a little bit better and that a little bit better. And like, because you can have in a community open source interaction on a piece of work that then can be improved, but this is never going to be like my translation's never going to be the it's two different coders working on two different codes. Like that's just, why would you merge the two unless two translators sit in a room and talk about every sentence? There's no way to create an initial translation that's a community version unless they did that for every sentence, you know?
Right. And at my job, we call that pair programming, and we do that sometimes too. We'll have two programmers sit down and, one keyboard between them. No, this is not like CSI where you see two people using the same keyboard at the same time. They're talking and one person is typing, but they'll, talk about, how they're going to structure whatever it is, what logic they're going to use, how they're going to divide everything up, and just go from there.
So what would be the benefit of pair programming?
It's fun, makes tough, challenging projects easier. It's a good way to learn from the other person. But it depends a lot on the project itself.
Hmm.
So sometimes pair programming winds up being a big distraction because it's a super simple project and you're both bored out of your mind. So you wind up distracting each other too much instead of actually focusing on the code.
One of the reasons I didn't do pair programming of the Vettius Valens anthology, because, I was kind of working with other people on it a little bit, and then I eventually had to go off on my own. And the reason for that was I'm not a historian, I'm a linguist, and I've been a sign language interpreter for 15 years, and I knew all this stuff from sign language interpreting, and I kept having to be like, obsequious and fawning about the other person's idea when it was I actually knew better from being an interpreter for 15 years professionally, where I was the team lead linguistically, but I was having to act like I wasn't the team lead to like acquiesce, or what is it called where you make someone, like I kept having to acquiesce. And so I had to go off on my own and be like, give me a few years, I'm just going to try this. And so it took me 15 years though, but I had to do it on my own because I was the team lead of my own linguistic world. And that wasn't like I was trying to be obstinate or rebellious. I was literally needing to not be interfered with as I did worked my process. So I didn't really, can you imagine if a programmer was paired, like let's say a 15-year programmer was paired with a 1-year programmer on a paired project? That becomes like I have to teach you what I know in order to even work together. I mean, you wouldn't do that, right? You would put two 15-year programmers together. Or, I mean, what do you think?
It depends. On my team, one of the ways that I help newer engineers is I pair program with them. Partly that's to help them learn the code that they're going to be working in. Partly it's so they get to know me and I get to know them and I get to see how they do and how they think, and just, makes us work better together in the long run. And part of my job is to help train them up and get them better at their job. My job is to make them better at their job. My job is not necessarily to be the only person who can code this stuff. My job is to make sure I'm not the only person who can code this stuff. So if I get hit by a bus, things can still get built. But also depends on the project and the difficulty. When I was dealing with some scaling issues, trying to deal with massive amounts of data, like ingest every tweet that comes out of Twitter, that's a big project. First year programmer, not really the right person to be in the room on that type of discussion, unless they went through a lot of schooling to deal with things of that size. Those discussions, back then I was, 10 years into my career. I was not the high enough level person to be in that room. I was there to keep quiet and learn while the big brains figured that problem out.
Well,
So
Well, so okay, what if you were on a okay, sorry, now I'm working through a little trauma here. Like, okay, so like what if you were you'd been programming for 15 years and someone had been programming for 1 year, but they were like expected you to act like you'd been programming for 1 year. Or like what if they didn't recognize you as a team lead and you were a team lead, would you have a hard time functioning?
Yes, yeah, that would be a challenging situation. Um, some of the ways that I've handled that, I mean, I don't know if we want to get into how I've handled that in the past. My immediate answer was, okay, you be the big dog. You think you can be the team lead? Have at it and just see how they do. Because again, I'm going to learn a lot about them when they're doing that. Going back to your specific situation in that translation room, I would say that what you needed was a team lead who was actually making sure the team as a whole was healthy. And I have seen situations like that where an older programmer and a younger programmer, excuse me, were not getting along, and the younger programmer was not being respected at all and was just constantly being overridden. And I had to step in and stop the older programmer from abusing the younger programmer. Maybe a bit of a strong term, but in some ways it's kind of accurate. You know, that's not a healthy team. You know, even if the younger programmer has less experience, that doesn't mean that they are stupid. It doesn't mean that their input is not valuable. It means that they have fresh eyes. They're thinking about things a little bit differently than everybody else. And maybe that's what we need in order to be successful.
Oh man. Now I realize that like I just am realizing what happened years ago. It's crazy how the past returns from the future, and just knowing you has changed my life so very much because you're able to talk calmly about these things with me and fill in the pieces of the puzzle that I didn't know. And like I just didn't know what I know now after talking to you in this hour. So thank you so much.
You are very welcome.
Is there anything else you want to talk about?
No, that's all I can think of.
What should we call this video?
I don't know.
Translation as a coding.
Feedback and team effort.
What is it?
Feedback and team effort.
Okay, feedback and team effort. Can I say your name, Shane Davis? Feedback and team effort.
Sure.
Maybe I'll say, maybe I'll call it office chat with Shane Davis, code reviews, feedback, and team effort. What do you think of that?
I would drop code reviews because that is code reviews and feedback to me are kind of the same thing. How about cross-functional feedback and team effort? Because we talked about translation and programming.
That's functional feedback and team effort. Okay, that's really heady. It's like, what do you have, like Mercury rising, sextile Uranus,
Something.
Mercury and Virgo? I love your chart, man. It's like so inevitably healing for my Pisces moon emotional baby chart. Like I'm just like a baby without you.
I'm just a rock. I just want to be a rock.
Do you think I'm too emotional?
No,
Yeah,
not at all. I think you are quite watery, though.
that's true. I probably keep things a little colorful for you.
You definitely bring some excitement to my life.
All right, well, I love you so much, honey.
I love you too, babe.
Okay, I'll see you at 4.
All righty.
Bye.
Bye.